In this video, I'm going to show you how to take an exported report, which is unstructured and the data is kind of everywhere, into this, where you take the data and extract it to a table using VBA. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a module, and I'm going to pull a couple of these macros because it'll help me later, but I'm just going to copy them to my workbook. And then I'm going to create a procedure called sub convert data. And so this is where I'm actually going to put all of my data in, or the code in for that. So, and the first thing I'm going to do is declare a worksheet as worksheet, and this will just be so I can reference back to it if I need to, or change it if I add another sheet. Maybe this one's this month, I can actually put in next month's and in there. And I'm just going to reference the code name here. So sheet one, I'm just going to reference. So set my worksheet is sheet one. And so if I ever got next month or something like that, I can import it. And then whatever the code name is, I just change that to like sheet two. And then this macro will still work. So then after that, I'm going to get the data into memory. So I'm essentially going to put all of this into memory. And so I'm going to do that with vdata. And vdata just stands for variant data, and it's what I particularly use. Some people might put VAR data. That's the typical Visual Basic nomenclature, but I like just vdata. And I'm going to say dot cells, dot special cells. I'm going to take the very last one because this special cell will be the last cell with data within that worksheet. I'm going to pull its address. So I'm going to go from A1 till the very last cell's address dot value. So what that does is that'll actually put the entire value of sheet one into a vdata, which is just going to be a two-dimensional variable with rows and columns of all this data. So the next thing I'm going to do is create my report variant. This is where I'm actually going to extract the data to, and that's what's going to be used to paste to the converted worksheet. And I'm going to do J as long because J is just my incrementer to know which row I'm on my table. And I'm going to start it on row one and I'm going to define my headers because here's where I'm going to actually define the columns that I want to extract from the report. Okay, so now I have it all in there. So what I'm doing is I declare vrep, which is just a blank grid of 100,000 rows, and I did 1 to 7 because I know I have 7 columns that I want to extract. So when you think of vdata and vreport, it should kind of look like this, where vdata is kind of your scrambled data that's from the export, and then vrep should just be a grid where everything is neatly ordered how you want it. And so the next thing I do, and this is my particular style, is I actually record which columns have the data that I'm looking for. So for every column here, I should have another variable that stores the column number that it's going to be in the file itself. So I'm going to do icall, which stands for integer column number date, and that one's going to be in column 1. And that's because over here, it's actually in column 1 right here. It's in cell A. And then I'm going to do this for all of the columns. Okay, so now I've essentially created the column. So column date is always 1. Column order, if I go over here, it's in column B, which B is the second letter of the alphabet. This is, and when you're talking about the V data, it's in a rows and columns grid that are indexed by number. And so customer is going to be in column E, and it's always the first one. Even if it's a merged cell, it's going to be the leftmost index. So like even though it's E and F, it's not going to be 6, it's going to be 5. And then if this one's 3 merged, it's only going to be referenced by G, which is, I call it product 7. So product is in 7, quantity is in 10, and then the total is in column 11, which is K. And I do this, I separate these here just in case the export changes, because if you're getting this out of an ERP system or Adobe, this could change the very next time you run this report. And rather than rewrite this whole entire macro, you can just change where the column is, and that would make things go so much faster. Okay, so now I've defined where my columns are. This is where I need to actually start looping through V data. And so I'm going to do a for I equals 1, which I'm just setting a variable of I equal to 1. And I'm going to go to the U bound, upper bound of V data on its first index. So the first dimension of it, which is the rows. If I did 2, that would have been based on the columns, which this one is goes to column 11, so, or column L, so it goes to 12 columns. So if it was 2, that would only go to 12. But since I'm going on the first dimension, it's going to go to the total number of rows within the variable. So I'm just setting up my for loop, and so this is going to execute for every single row within V data, which is just all of this in a grid in memory. And so the first thing, I need to start identifying some unique aspects. And so for date, I see something that is unique about where the date is, that it is always got the word date there. There's in column A, date only appears when the date of this transaction is. The date doesn't show up in column A anywhere else throughout this report. So I can use that as a way to extract the date for this particular record. And so if left, and I'm going to say v data I1, because I is the row number and then 1 is going to be the column number. So if v data of the row in column 1, and I'm going to say left because because it's going to be date colon space. And so that's going to be 6 characters equals date colon space. So this is 6 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's why the left of that value in the A column, if it's date, we're going to do this. And that's what I'm going to store date in a variable, because when you're reading, it's going to start from the top and go down to the bottom. Well, you see, when I get to date, I don't have the rest of my data. And so I know by the time it execute this loop, I'm not going to have the entire record that I'm looking for. So I just need to, anytime that you don't have the remainder of that the data for your record, you need to store the value in memory. And so I create a variable called sdate, which stands for string date. And this is where I'm going to actually extract, like here, I'm going to extract August 30th, 2013 from this. And so I'm going to say write v data I, and this is where I'm going to pull that column that I set up here, because I'm going to say if it's right, I call date, and I'm going to take the length of that particular string, I call date, minus 6, because essentially I'm removing the word date colon space from that. So that's what this particular code does right there. So now I've actually stored the date. Now, next thing I need to do is go get something else, because that's the only thing on this particular row. And so imagining that I'm just continuing going down, next thing I'm going to come up with is categories, because I'm looking for category and I see the next thing as I'm reading it downward is category. So I need to figure out a way to extract that. Well, this one, it's going to be almost exactly the same, because it's the only thing in column A that starts with category. So I'm going to do the same thing there. Okay. And so now I've got my category. So the next thing I'm going to do is look for, as I'm reading down, well, the next thing, I have the actual remainder of the data in the record, which is the good, because this is going to be the endpoint for it. And so how am I going to identify this compared to any other row? How is it going to differentiate itself from up here, or things like that, header rows and total rows? How is it going to distinguish? Now, this can be different, and you can actually come up with 100 different ways to make it unique. So it's kind of up to you. For me, I can see that this particular column always begins with the letters SO. And the more items that you use to make it unique, the more you're likely to get strong data from this. Now, this one's fairly well structured, so I probably only need 1 or 2 unique items to verify through. And so that's what I'm going to start with. Okay, so now I've set up my conditional. So if that particular column is SO, and then I'm adding in another uniqueness just to make sure that this value here is numeric. Now, like I said, and a lot of this is a kind of a guess and check too. So if I ran this and then I noticed it was pulling in a lot of things that it shouldn't, well, I know I need to add more unique characters here. Or if I go through here and I see that it's actually not picking up stuff, then maybe I don't have, maybe it's not as unique as I thought, or maybe it's actually excluding stuff it shouldn't. So getting the unique values can be kind of a guess and check kind of thing. So, but for this one, I know it's these two are enough to get me what I'm looking for. And so now I'm actually on the data row. So I no longer need to store it in memory. I can actually go ahead and put it in my report variant. Because right now my report variant would be on the first time it's going through would just be sitting on row 1, which is the headers, and nothing more. So next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a row to my report variant. In there, I'm just going to start pasting the data. All right. So now I've got it in there. So the first two columns I pulled from memory because I had to read them on previous lines, but all the other values I can pull directly from the row that I'm on. And so that's why I'm going to just reference the columns that I set up here. And so I'm going to set column 3, which is order number, to whatever I set as the column for the order number, and same so on and so forth for all the different items that are going to be on this particular row. Okay, so now that's actually the for loop is done. And so that will actually read through the entire V data and essentially copy it to this V report. And now I have V report in memory. So now what I got to do is go and paste it. So first thing, I check to make sure that data was actually copied. See, if J is still at 1, then I know I didn't get any data and I'm not going to do anything. But if J is greater than 1, I know I have data, so I need to paste it. So I'm going to add a sheet, and I'm going to call it converted. And here's where I'm actually going to go and paste the data. Okay, so what I've done here is I've set my worksheet, which is just reusing this variable up here because I don't need this variable up here anymore. So I'm just going to reuse it rather than declare another one. And I'm going to add a sheet called converted. And I use add sheet, which calls this function, which will actually delete it if it exists. And I do that because if I'm testing this and testing my unique character or unique values up here, I may get stuff wrong. And rather than have it add sheets and then give me an error when it tries to delete them, I use this function that'll actually just delete the sheet that was there, replace it. It just makes it a lot simpler. Then I do from on that worksheet range A1, because I always start in the top left corner of the sheet. And then I go to G. G is pulled based on the variance number of columns. So this one has 7 columns. G is the 7th letter of the alphabet. So I'm going to pull through G, and then and J. So I'm appending J because J is incremented every time I have a record. So if I have 50 records, J is going to be 50. So I want to make sure I'm going from A1 to my last cell in row 50. And then I'm pasting the variant, which that's the report variant that I have in memory. And then these next 3, I just do some formatting. Like I'm changing the first one to date. I changed the total column to a comma style. And then the last thing I always do is before I just put the cursor back in the top left is I auto fit all the columns so I can see everything, because doing this command right here is just going to paste the report variant as values. And so when you do that, it's not going to auto size any of the columns. So it'll be all the columns will just be that same default column width for new sheets. And so doing this will always make it so you can actually see all your data. So now I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. So I'm going to put the cursor within the procedure anywhere and click play. And voila, you can see that it actually took this data, which is unstructured. You can't really do any pivot tables or anything on that, or you can, but it takes a lot of copying and pasting. In about 5 or 10 minutes, I was able to take that data and change it to an actual table that I can do a pivot table on, run charts, and all different things. So this was a fairly simple example. I would say this is beginner's level of converting data. And a lot of data will be like this out of ERP systems. And in a future video, I will show you how to do a much more complicated data, but it can all be done through VBA because VBA is just so powerful. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you.